Tunde's hands were bleeding again. He stared at his palms in the dim morning light, watching fresh blood mix with old scars. The hoe had slipped once more, cutting into skin that had never quite healed from yesterday's work. He wrapped his hands in torn cloth and picked up the tool again. The sun was not yet fully awake, but he had learned long ago that starting early made no difference. The work would still be twice as hard and the results would still be half as good. He was 20 harvest old, though his body told a different story. His frame was thin and twisted, his left shoulder sitting higher than his right from years of carrying water pots that were too heavy for his weak arms. His left leg dragged slightly when he walked, a gift from childhood fever that his family had been too poor to treat. A large birthmark spread across the right side of his face like spilled oil, dark and impossible to hide. His eyes were uneven, his nose crooked, his lips too thin. The village of Adampo had many words for him: useless, cursed, abomination, bad luck walking on two legs. But Tunde had learned to answer to all of them. He limped toward the yam field that his Uncle Bayo had assigned him, the smallest and rockiest plot, where nothing ever grew properly. The other young men were already gathering near the good fields, their voices loud with laughter and boasting. They did not greet him. They never did. Tunde, did you see that girl from the next village? One of them called out. The one with hips like water pots. I will marry her before the next harvest. Their laughter rang out across the fields like bells. Tunde kept his head down and kept walking. He had learned that making himself invisible was easier than facing their mockery. Tunde, a voice called out. It was Kola, the chief's nephew, a young man with broad shoulders and a smile that could charm anyone. Are you going to kill more yams today, or will you just look at them until they die of ugliness? More laughter, sharp and cutting. Tunde's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He had learned that silence was the only response that did not make things worse. He reached his plot and began to walk. The soil here was hard and filled with stones. Every time he struck the ground, pain shot up his weak arms. His twisted shoulder burned. His bad leg threatened to give out beneath him. But he kept going. He always kept going. What else could he do? By midday, sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes and mixing with the dust that coated his skin. His hands shook from exhaustion. Around him, the other young men had already finished their sections and left for the village, their fields neat and prepared for planting. Tunde's plot was barely half done. Useless, he whispered to himself. The word felt familiar in his mouth, like a name he had been called since birth. As he bent to pull another stone from the soil, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to see his Uncle Bayo approaching, his face twisted in disgust. Still not finished, he spat on the ground. The sun is high and you have done the work of a child. My brother, your father, God rest his soul, he must be turning in his grave with shame. Tunde opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, but his uncle raised a hand to silence him. Do not speak. Every time you open your mouth, you waste the air that better men need to breathe. Bayo looked at the field, then back at Tunde with cold eyes. You know what your mother said before she died? Tunde felt his heart clench. He knew. Everyone in the village knew. But hearing it again never hurt less. She said giving birth to you was her punishment from the gods. She said you sucked the life out of her from the inside. Bayo stepped closer, his breath hot with palm wine. And she was right. You are a curse, boy. You have always been a curse. The words landed like stones on Tunde's chest, but he forced himself to stand straight, to not let his uncle see him break. I will finish the field before sunset, Tunde said quietly. Bayo laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You will try, and you will fail, like you fail at everything. He turned to leave, then stopped. Your food is getting smaller. We cannot afford to feed someone who produces nothing. Remember that. Tunde watched his uncle walk away, his vision blurring with tears he refused to let fall. He turned back to his field, to the stones and hard earth, and picked up his hoe. He would finish, even if it killed him, even if no one cared, even if it changed nothing, because what else could he do? As the sun began to descend toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Tunde finally planted the last yam seedling. His entire body screamed with pain. His hands left bloody prints on everything he touched. His bad leg could barely support his weight, but the field was done. He allowed himself one moment, just one, to feel something like pride. Then he heard this screaming. It came from the village, high-pitched and terrified. Women's voices, children crying, men shouting. Tunde's stomach dropped. He grabbed his walking stick and hurried toward the sound as fast as his bad leg allowed. When he reached the village square, his blood turned to ice. The well, the ancient well that had given water since before anyone could remember, was dry, completely dry, and at the bottom, visible even from the surface, the stones were stained red like blood. Chief Obuasi stood at the well's edge, his face ashen. The priests surrounded him, their ritual beads clicking frantically as they chanted prayers. The entire village had gathered, their faces masks of terror. "The gods are angry," Mama Kosi wailed, her old voice cutting through the chaos. "Someone has brought a curse upon us." And then, as if pulled by an invisible string, every head turned. Every eye found Tunde, standing at the edge of the crowd, covered in dust and blood from his field work, looking exactly like what they had always believed him to be, a curse. What terrible judgment would the village pass on Tunde now? The answer would seal his fate. They locked him in the grain storage hut. Tunde sat in the darkness, his back against sacks of millet, listening to the sounds of fear outside. The village was coming apart like old cloth. He could hear babies screaming, mothers praying, fathers arguing in voices tight with panic. The well was not the only problem anymore. By sunset, 3 more disasters had struck. The chief's prize bull, the strongest in 5 villages, had dropped dead in the middle of the compound, foam pouring from its mouth. Then old Papa Mensah's roof collapsed while he slept, crushing his leg. And worst of all, little Abena, only 6 harvests old, had started coughing blood. "Tunde!" someone screamed outside. "This is your doing. You have brought evil to us." He closed his eyes and tried to steady his breathing. His hands were still bleeding, but no one had brought him water to wash them. No one had brought him food. They had simply grabbed him in the square, dragged him to this hut, and locked the door. His uncle Bayo had led the group. "Until the priests tell us what to do with you," he had said, "you stay here. If you try to escape, we will kill you ourselves." Tunde had not tried to escape. Where would he go? What village would take a cursed man? What family would shelter bad luck? He pulled his knees to his chest and let his head fall forward. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to cry. Not loud sobs that anyone could hear, but quiet tears that slid down his face and dripped onto the dirt floor. "I did not do this," he whispered to the darkness. "I did not do anything." But even as he said the words, doubt crept in like smoke. Maybe he was cursed. Maybe his very existence was poison. After all, his mother died 3 days after birthing him. His father followed her within a year, his heart simply stopping one night, as if it had lost the will to beat. Every family that took him in suffered loss. Every field he touched yielded poor crops. Maybe they were right. Maybe the village would be better off without him. The thought settled in his chest like a stone, heavy and cold. Outside, drums began to beat. Not celebration drums. These were deep, slow drums of ritual. The priests were calling the oracle. Tunde knew what would happen next. The priests would enter the sacred grove, would cast the bones and cowrie shells, would read the signs that only they could understand, and then they would announce the will of the gods. He waited through the long night.
his body aching, his stomach empty, his heart filled with a fear he could not name. Just before dawn, the drums stopped. Silence fell over the village like a blanket. Then footsteps, many of them, coming toward the storage hut. The door burst open. Torchlight flooded in, blinding Tunde. Rough hands grabbed him and dragged him out into the grey morning light. The entire village had gathered in the square. Every man, woman, and child. Their faces were hard as stone. Chief Obuasi stood on the platform, dressed in his full ceremonial robes. Beside him stood the 3 priests, their faces painted white with sacred chalk, their eyes red from a night of ritual. The crowd parted as they dragged Tunde forward and threw him down at the chief's feet. He landed hard on his weak shoulder, pain exploding through his body. He did not cry out. He had learned long ago that showing pain only made them enjoy it more. Tunde, son of Adisa, Chief Obuasi's voice rang out across the square. The oracle has spoken. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for judgment. The head priest stepped forward, his voice deep and hollow. The gods are angry. The land suffers because a great injustice has been committed. Blood has stained our village. Evil walks among us. It is him, someone shouted. The cursed one. Silence, the priest commanded. He raised his staff and the crowd obeyed. The gods demand balance. The gods demand payment. The gods demand... He paused, his eyes falling on Tunde with something that might have been pity. A life. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A sacrifice, the priest continued. One life, freely given, to restore what has been broken. One death to save the many. Tunde's heart stopped beating. He knew what was coming. He had always known it would end this way. Chief Obuasi raised his hand. Who shall we give to the gods? The answer came like thunder from 100 mouths at once. Tunde, the cursed one. Give them the boy who brings bad luck. He has never been useful in life. Let him be useful in death. Tunde looked up at the faces surrounding him. Men who watched him struggle in the fields and laughed. Women who turned away when he begged for water. Children who threw stones at him and called him monster. And there, in the front, his Uncle Bayo, nodding with satisfaction. It makes sense, Bayo said loudly. The gods will not miss someone who has never mattered. The words cut deeper than any knife. Chief Obuasi looked down at Tunde, and for a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt? Guilt? But it vanished as quickly as it came. Tunde, son of Adisa, the chief said formally, the oracle has chosen you. At sunset, you will be taken to the sacred grove of ancestors. There, the priest will offer you to the gods, and your blood will cleanse our land. The crowd erupted in approval. Some cheered, some clapped, some simply nodded with relief, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from their shoulders. Tunde remained on his knees, his mind strangely quiet. He thought he would be more afraid. He thought he would scream or beg or run, but instead, he felt only a deep, aching tiredness. Do you accept your fate? The head priest asked. Tunde looked up at the sky, at the sun rising red and angry over the village. He thought about running. He thought about fighting. He thought about cursing them all with his last words. But what came out of his mouth was simple and quiet. I accept. The crowd fell silent, surprised. I accept, Tunde said again, louder this time. If my death will save the village, if my blood will bring rain and heal the sick, then I accept. He looked directly at his Uncle Bayo. I have tried all my life to be useful. If this is how I finally serve my people, then let it be so. Something changed in the air. Some of the women looked away, shame coloring their faces. Some of the men shifted uncomfortably. Even Chief Obuasi seemed troubled. But it was too late. The decision was made. The oracle had spoken. They locked him in the hut again, but this time they brought him food and water. Not much, but enough. A condemned man's final meal. Tunde ate slowly, Tasting nothing, he drank the water and felt it slide down his throat like liquid sadness. Through the small window, he could see them preparing, building the ceremonial platform, sharpening the sacred knife, gathering the herbs and oils for the ritual. His execution would be at sunset. He had one day left to live. Would Tunde find courage in his final hours, or would the village's cruelty finally break him? The sun was already climbing towards his last sunset.
The sun moved across the sky like a slow blade. Tunde sat in the hut and watched light shift through the cracks in the walls, marking the hours of his final day. His mind was strange, not panicked, not calm, but floating somewhere in between, like he was already a ghost watching his own life from a distance. They had brought him water 3 times and a bowl of yam porridge with palm oil, more food than he normally ate in 2 days. The kindness of it made him want to laugh and cry at the same time. Now that he was going to die, suddenly he was worth feeding. Through the walls, he could hear the village preparing, women singing funeral songs, men building the platform at the sacred grove, children being warned to stay away from the storage hut because his curse might leak out and touch them. His curse, his uselessness, his worthless life. The words circled his mind like vultures. Was it true? Had he really been born wrong, marked by the gods for suffering? Or had the village simply decided he was cursed and made it true by treating him like poison? He would never know the answer. Around midday, someone unexpected came to the door. Tunde. The voice was soft, hesitant, female. He looked up, surprised. Who is there? It is Amma. His breath caught. Amma. The girl who had been kind to him once when they were children, before the others taught her that kindness to him meant loneliness for her. She had given him a mango once, secret and sweet, when his uncle had sent him to bed hungry. What do you want? He asked, not unkindly. She paused. He heard her crying softly on the other side of the door. I am sorry. 3 words, simple, devastating. For what? Tunde asked. For everything, for turning away, for laughing when others mocked you, for being a coward. Her voice broke. You did not deserve this life, Tunde. You did not deserve any of it. Tunde closed his eyes. The words were water on a wound he had thought was too old to feel. It does not matter now, he said softly. It does matter, Amma insisted, her voice fierce through the door. It matters because it is wrong. You are not cursed. You are not useless. You have just been, she searched for words, unlucky, born into circumstances that were not your fault. Then why did you not speak up? Tunde asked, not accusing, just wondering. Why did no one speak up? Silence. Then, because we were afraid of being cast out like you, afraid of being called cursed too. She sobbed. I was a coward. I am still a coward. I came to apologize, but I will not stand in the square and stop this. I will not save you. I know, Tunde said. And he did. He understood fear. He had lived with it every day of his life. I will remember you, Amma whispered. After today, I will remember that we killed a good man because we were afraid. He heard her footsteps retreating, fast, like she was running from shame. Tunde sat back against the wall and let her words settle in his chest. A good man. No one had ever called him that before. The sun continued its march across the sky. When the shadows grew long and the light turned golden, the drums began again. Slow, deep, final. The door opened. The 3 priests stood there in full ceremonial dress, their bodies painted with white and red symbols, their eyes glazed with palm wine and ritual herbs. It is time, the head priest said. Tunde stood on shaking legs. His body did not want to die, even if his mind had accepted it. His heart hammered in his chest. His palms grew slick with sweat. They tied his hands in front of him with sacred rope, not tight enough to hurt, but enough to mark him as a sacrifice. They placed a white cloth around his neck, the cloth of the condemned. As they led him out into the dying light, the entire village stood in 2 lines, creating a path from the hut to the edge of the village where the sacred grove waited in shadow. Tunde walked between them, his bad leg dragging, his twisted shoulder aching. He kept his head up, forced himself to look at their faces. Some looked away, ashamed.
Some stared with satisfaction. Some wept quietly. Children hid behind their mother's skirts, peeking out at the cursed boy walking to his death. His uncle Bayo stood near the front, arms crossed, face impassive. When Tunde passed, Bayo spat on the ground. Finally useful, he muttered. Tunde stopped walking. The priests paused, waiting. Uncle, Tunde said quietly. Bayo looked up, surprised that the condemned would dare speak to him. I forgive you, Tunde said. The word seemed to strike Bayo like a physical blow. His face twisted with confusion, then anger, then something that might have been shame. He turned away, unable to meet Tunde's eyes. Tunde continued walking. If you are watching this, do not scroll away yet. Subscribe to this channel because what happens next will shake your understanding of justice, mercy, and divine purpose. The gods are watching and they are about to speak. The path led into the forest, where ancient trees grew so thick that the dying sunlight barely penetrated. The air grew cooler. Birds fell silent. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. The sacred grove appeared before them, like a wound in the earth, a circular clearing where no grass grew, where the ground was stained dark from generations of sacrifices, animal blood mostly, goats, chickens, offerings to appease the gods during difficult times. But today, they would spill human blood. In the center of the grove stood a flat stone altar, polished smooth by time and use. Around it, carved wooden statues of the gods stared down with empty eyes. The air smelled of incense and something older, something that made Tunde's skin crawl with primal fear. The priests led him to the altar. Lie down, the head priest commanded. Tunde's legs would not move. His body rebelled, every instinct screaming at him to run, to fight, to live. Lie down, the priest repeated, gentler this time. Tunde forced himself to move. He climbed onto the cold stone and lay on his back, staring up at the darkening sky through the gap in the trees. The stone was cold against his spine. He could see the first stars appearing, distant and uncaring. The priest began to chant in the old language, words Tunde did not understand but felt in his bones. They moved around him in a circle, sprinkling sacred herbs, drawing symbols in the dirt with white chalk. The head priest lifted the ceremonial knife, a blade of polished obsidian that caught the last rays of the sun and turned them red. Tunde's heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst through his chest. His palms grew slick with sweat. His breath came in short gasps. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes without permission. He did not want to die. God, he did not want to die. But he did not scream. He did not beg. He simply closed his eyes and thought of Amma's words. A good man. Ancestors, receive this offering, the head priest called out, his voice echoing through the grove. Accept this life in exchange for the healing of our land. Let his blood wash away the curse that plagues us. Let his death restore balance. The knife rose high above Tunde's chest. He thought of his mother, dead 3 days after bringing him into the world. He thought of his father, whose heart had broken with grief. He thought of every insult, every beating, every hungry night, every moment of loneliness. He thought of the yam field he had finished today, the one no one would remember. The knife began its descent, and then the world exploded with light. What force could stop the blade? What power would dare interrupt the judgment of the priests? The answer was about to change everything.
The light came from everywhere and nowhere at once. It buzzed from the ground, from the trees, from the very air itself, so bright that the priest screamed and fell backward, dropping the ceremonial knife. It clattered against the stone altar, the sound sharp and final in the sudden silence. Tunde squeezed his eyes shut against the brilliance, but he could still see it through his eyelids, white hot, pure, like staring at the sun. Then came the voice. It was not one voice but many, layered over each other like water flowing over rocks, male and female and neither, young and ancient, speaking in perfect harmony that vibrated through Tunde's chest and made his bones hum. Stop! The single word carried such power that the trees bent backward. The carved statues of the gods around the altar began to glow from within, their empty eyes suddenly alive with divine fire. The head priest scrambled backward on his hands and knees, his painted face streaked with terror. The gods speak! We speak, the voices confirmed, and the words seemed to come from the glowing statues, from the light itself.
and we see what you have done." Tunde lay frozen on the altar, his heart still racing, his mind unable to process what was happening. Was he already dead? Was this the afterlife? "Rise, Tunde, son of Adisa," the gods commanded. His body moved before his mind could question it. He sat up on the altar, his tied hands trembling, his eyes still unable to fully open against the brilliance. "Look upon us," the voices said, and the light softened enough that he could see. The statues around him were fully alive now, their wooden forms flowing like water, shifting between solid and spirit. One was a woman with eyes like stars. Another was a man with skin like polished ebony. A third was neither male nor female, its form constantly changing. Others he could not fully comprehend, their shapes hurting his mind to perceive. These were the gods of Adanko, the ancestors, the divine powers that had supposedly chosen him for death. Tunde lay frozen on the altar, his heart still racing, his mind unable to process what was happening. Was he already dead? Was this the afterlife? "Rise, Tunde, son of Adisa," the gods commanded. His body moved before his mind could question it. He sat up on the altar, his tied hands trembling, his eyes still unable to fully open against the brilliance. "Look upon us," the voices said, and the light softened enough that he could see. The statues around him were fully alive now, their wooden forms flowing like water, shifting between solid and spirit. One was a woman with eyes like stars. Another was a man with skin like polished ebony. A third was neither male nor female, its form constantly changing. Others he could not fully comprehend, their shapes hurting his mind to perceive. These were the gods of Adanko, the ancestors, the divine powers that had supposedly chosen him for death. Tunde lay frozen on the altar, his heart still racing, his mind unable to process what was happening. Was he already dead? Was this the afterlife? "Rise, Tunde, son of Adisa," the gods commanded. His body moved before his mind could question it. He sat up on the altar, his tied hands trembling, his eyes still unable to fully open against the brilliance. "Look upon us," the voices said, and the light softened enough that he could see. The statues around him were fully alive now, their wooden forms flowing like water, shifting between solid and spirit. One was a woman with eyes like stars. Another was a man with skin like polished ebony. A third was neither male nor female, its form constantly changing. Others he could not fully comprehend, their shapes hurting his mind to perceive. These were the gods of Adanko, the ancestors, the divine powers that had supposedly chosen him for death. Tunde lay frozen on the altar, his heart still racing, his mind unable to process what was happening. Was he already dead? Was this the afterlife? "Rise, Tunde, son of Adisa," the gods commanded. His body moved before his mind could question it. He sat up on the altar, his tied hands trembling, his eyes still unable to fully open against the brilliance. "You chose me," Tunde whispered, his voice cracking. "The oracle chose me to die." "We chose no such thing," the woman goddess said, and her voice was filled with cold fury. "We sent no message. We demanded no sacrifice." The priest, still cowering at the edge of the grove, began to shake. The head priest's face had turned grey with terror. But the bones, the cowrie shells," he stammered. "You read what you wanted to read. You saw what your fear and prejudice showed you. You chose the life you deemed worthless and called it our will." The truth of those words fell like an axe. "This boy has done nothing wrong," the changing god said, his voice like wind through leaves. His only crime was being born different in a village that mistakes difference for evil. Tunde felt something breaking inside his chest. Not pain, but a release, like a rope he had been tied with his entire life suddenly cut. They saw him, the gods saw him, and they did not see him a curse. "We have watched him," the woman goddess continued, her starlight eyes fixed on Tunde. "We have watched him endure mockery with patience. We have watched him suffer cruelty without becoming cruel. We have watched him break inside 1,000 times and still choose kindness." She gestured to the priests. "You asked the gods for a sign? We will give you one. This boy, this man you call useless, he is worth more than all of you combined." The head priest opened his mouth to protest, but the man god silenced him with a look. "You dare speak?" the god's voice boomed. "You who would murder an innocent to avoid admitting your own failures?" "Our failures?" the priest whispered. "Yes." All the gods spoke at once now, their voices shaking the earth. "Your village suffers because of your injustice. The well runs dry because you denied water to those you deemed unworthy. The crops fail because you hoarded the good soil for the wealthy. The sickness spreads because you cast out those who could not pay the healers. Tunde's mind reeled. All this time, he had believed he was the cause of the village's suffering, but the gods were saying it was the village itself, their cruelty, their injustice, their hardness of heart. And this boy, the woman goddess said softly, turning back to Tunde, this boy who you blamed for every misfortune, who you worked to death and starved and beat, he was the only pure-hearted one among you. We chose him long ago, the changing god added, not for death, but for life. We tested him with suffering to see if it would poison his spirit. It did not. He endured cruelty without becoming cruel. He suffered injustice without becoming unjust. He was broken again and again, and still he forgave. Tunde thought of his last words to his uncle, I forgive you. That is why we intervene, the man god declared, not to save you, he gestured to the priests and the village beyond, but to save him from your wickedness. The head priest fell to his face. Forgive us, we did not know. You did not want to know, the woman goddess cut him off. It was easier to blame one weak boy than to examine your own hearts. She raised her hand, and the light pulsed with power. Hear our judgment. The suffering you have experienced will continue until you make right what you have broken. The well will give no water until you confess your injustice. The crops will yield no harvest until you honor those you have despised. The sickness will not heal until you heal the wounds you have inflicted on the innocent. And this boy, the changing god said, its form settling into something almost human, something achingly beautiful. He will return to you alive, and you will see what you almost destroyed. The gods turned to Tunde together. You are free, they said in unison, free of blame, free of shame, free of the curse they placed on you with their words and actions. You are never useless, Tunde. You are chosen. The sacred rope around his wrist dissolved into light and fell away. Return to the village, the woman goddess commanded. Let them see what the gods truly value. And know this, the man god added, his voice softening. You will never walk alone again. We see you. We have always seen you. The light began to fade. Tunde found his voice at last. He asked through tears, Why? Why did you let me suffer so long? The changing god smiled, sad and knowing. Because the soul refined by fire shines brightest in the darkness. You are being prepared, child, for what comes next. Before Tunde could ask what that meant, the light vanished completely. The grove was dark and silent. The statues were just wood again, their eyes empty, their forms still. The priest lay on the ground, trembling. Tunde stood on the altar, his hands free, his heart pounding, his entire understanding of his life shattered and remade in moments. He was alive. The gods had chosen him, not for death, for something else entirely. Tunde walked out of the sacred grove alone. The priests remained behind, prostrate on the ground, too terrified to move. He did not wait for them. The gods had set him free, and he would not spend another moment as anyone's prisoner. His legs shook as he walked the forest path back toward the village. His mind still struggled to grasp what had happened. The gods had spoken. They had called him chosen. They had declared his suffering unjust. All his life, he had believed the village was right about him, that he was cursed, useless, a burden that deserved every beating, every insult, every hungry night. The gods had just told him that was a lie. The weight of that truth made him stop walking and lean against a tree, gasping for breath. Tears poured down his face, not from sadness, but from something bigger than he had words for. Release, vindication, the soul-deep exhaustion of carrying a false guilt for 20 years and finally being allowed to set it down. He cried until his body had nothing left. Then he wiped his face with his torn sleeve and continued walking. As he approached the village, he heard voices. The entire population had gathered at the edge of the forest, waiting for news of the sacrifice. Torches flickered in the darkness. He could see Chief Obuasi at the front, his ceremonial robes making him easy to spot. His uncle Bayo stood nearby. Hundreds of faces turned toward the path, expecting the priest to emerge with news of successful blood offering. Instead, they saw Tunde, alive, walking toward them with his hands free and his head held high. The crowd gasped. Women screamed. Men reached for weapons, thinking he was a ghost, an evil spirit come to haunt them. "He lives!" someone shrieked. "The sacrifice lives!" "Demon!" another voice called. "He has escaped the gods." But then the priests emerged from the forest behind Tunde, and their faces told a different story. They were not angry, they were terrified, broken. The head priest fell to his knees in the dirt before the entire village. "The God spoke," he said, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "The God spoke, and we were wrong. We were all wrong." Chief Obuasi stepped forward. "What do you mean?" "Tunde was innocent," the priest said, his voice breaking. "The gods did not choose him for sacrifice. They chose him for honor. They intervened to save him from our injustice." All the crowd erupted in confused voices, some denying it, some demanding to know more. "Silence!" the head priest roared with authority he did not seem to possess moments before. "You will hear what the gods declared." He recounted everything: the light, the voices, the judgment, how the gods had revealed that the village's suffering came from its own cruelty, not Tunde, how they had called Tunde pure-hearted while condemning the elders for mistaking wisdom for cruelty. As he spoke, faces changed, some filled with shame, some with disbelief, some with anger at being called unjust. Tunde stood and watched them process the truth that had just destroyed their entire understanding of their world. His uncle Bayo pushed forward. "This is madness. The boy is cursed. He has always been cursed." "No," a woman's voice rang out. It was Mama Kosi, the eldest in the village, her white hair glowing in the torchlight. "The gods do not lie. If they say we were wrong, then we were wrong." She walked toward Tunde with slow, deliberate steps. When she reached him, she did something that made the entire village fall silent. She knelt at his feet. "Forgive us," she said, her old voice shaking. "Forgive me. I called you cursed. I turned away when you needed help. I taught my children and grandchildren to despise you." Tears ran down her weathered face. "The gods are right. We are the ones who brought suffering to this village, not you." One by one, others began to kneel. First, the women who denied him water, then the men who mocked him in the fields, then the young people who threw stones. Even some of the elders lowered themselves to the ground, their pride breaking like old pottery. But not everyone. His uncle Bayo remained standing, his face twisted with rage and shame. "I will not kneel to this what?" Chief Obuasi's voice cut through the night like a blade. The chief walked forward, and for the first time he saw something in Tunde's eyes that might have been respect. "The gods have spoken, Bayo. Will you defy them?" "He is weak," shouted Bayo desperately. "He is ugly. He cannot work. What does it matter what the gods say? He is still useless." "The gods say he is chosen," the chief replied quietly. "That is all that matters." Then Chief Obuasi did something that no one expected. He removed his royal beads, the symbol of his authority, and approached Tunde. He placed the beads around Tunde's neck with his own hands. "I was wrong," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I let an innocent man be dragged to death because it was easier to admit that our village had become rotten from within." He stepped back and lowered his head. "The gods have judged us, and we are found wanting." The weight of the beads around Tunde's neck felt strange, heavy, real. "The gods gave us a decree," the head priest said, rising to his feet. "Our suffering will not end until we make right what we have broken. We must confess our injustice publicly. We must honor the one we despised. Only then will the well give water again. Only then will the crops grow. Only then will our children heal." Tunde found his voice at last. It came out stronger than he expected. "I forgive you," he said. The words fell into the silence like stones into still water, rippling out across the crowd. "I forgive you," he repeated, looking at the kneeling villagers, at his uncle who still refused to bow, at the chief who condemned him hours ago. "I touched my birthmark on my face, the twisted shoulder, the weak leg. You called these things curses. The gods called them tests. You tried to destroy me with your cruelty. Instead, you refined me." Some people began to weep openly now. "I will not hate you," Tunde continued. "I will not seek revenge. I will be what the gods called me to be, someone who endures suffering without becoming cruel." He looked directly at his uncle Bayo. "Even you, uncle, I forgive even you." Something broke in Bayo's face. His anger collapsed inward, revealing the shame and guilt underneath. His knees buckled, and he fell to the ground, his hands covering his body as sobs racked him. "I am sorry," Bayo choked out. "I am so sorry. I blamed you for my own failures. I hated you because you reminded me of my brother, and I could not save him. His voice failed him. Tunde walked to his uncle and placed a hand on his head. "I know," he said softly. "I know. The night air seemed to shift then, as if the gods themselves were watching with approval. Chief Obuasi raised his voice. Tomorrow at dawn, we will gather at the well. Every person in this village will confess their wrongdoing toward Tunde. We will speak our injustice out loud before the gods and each other, and we will honor him as the gods have honored him. Tunde felt exhaustion crushing over him like a wave. His body still ached, his hands still bled, but something inside him had changed forever. He was no longer the cursed one. He was chosen. But what would happen at dawn? Would the village truly change? And what did the gods mean when they said Tunde was being prepared for what comes next?
Dawn came soft and golden over the village of Adanko. Tunde had not slept. He had spent the night in the proper hut, not the storage shed, but a guest house usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. They had brought him food, water, clean clothes. Women had wept as they tended his wounded hands. Men had apologized in voices thick with shame. It felt like living in a dream. Now, as the first light touched the sky, he walked toward the village well. The entire population was already gathered there, silent and solemn. They had spent the night in fasting and prayer, as the priests had commanded. The well still stood dry and stained with red, a reminder of their judgment. Chief Obuasi stood beside it, no longer wearing his full ceremonial regalia. He had dressed simply, like a common man. The head priest stood nearby, his face painted not with proud symbols, but with ash, the mark of repentance. When Tunde arrived, the crowd parted for him, and people lowered their heads as he passed. It still felt wrong, alien, like wearing clothes that did not fit. Yesterday, they had wanted him dead. Today, they bowed. Tunde, son of Adisa, Chief Obuasi called out, "Please stand beside the well." Tunde did as he was asked, his heart pounding. He did not know what would happen next. The chief raised his hands. "People of Adanko, we stand before the gods as broken people. We have sinned against the innocent. We have called evil good and good evil. We have crushed the weak and exalted the cruel. Today we confess our wrong." He turned to Tunde. "I, Obuasi, chief of this village, confess that I condemned you without seeking truth. I let you be dragged to death because it was easier than admitting our village's failure. I called you useless when you were faithful. I called you cursed when you were blessed. I was wrong. I am sorry." The words hung in the morning air. Then others began to speak. "I denied you water when you were thirsty," a woman said, stepping forward. "I am sorry. I beat you for breaking a pot that I broke myself. I blamed you for my own clumsiness. I am sorry. I threw stones at you and called you monster," a young man said, his voice shaking. "I made your childhood a living hell because others did, and I wanted to belong. I am sorry." One by one, they came forward. Hundreds of confessions, some small, some devastating. The air grew thick with truth. His uncle Bayo stepped forward last, his face haggard from a night of weeping. "He took you in when your father died," Bayo said, his voice raw. "But I did not treat you like family. I worked you like a slave. I starved you. I told you that your mother regretted giving birth to you." He paused, tears streaming down his face. "That was a lie. Your mother's last words were, 'Protect my son.' And I failed her. I failed you. I failed the gods." Bayo fell to his knees. "I have no right to ask forgiveness, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn it." Tunde looked at his uncle, the man who made his life a misery, who had led the charge to sacrifice him, and felt something unexpected. Not hate, not even anger, pity. "I forgive you, uncle," Tunde said. "I forgive all of you." The moment he spoke those words, the air changed. The sky, which had been clear, suddenly filled with clouds, not dark storm clouds, but the kind of clouds that promised gentle rain. A wind picked up, carrying the smell of water, of life, of blessing. The head priest raised his staff. "The gods accept our repentance. Honor the chosen one." The crowd responded, "Honor Tunde. Honor the one who endured.
Honor the pure-hearted. Their voices rose together, no longer mocking but celebrating. The sound washed over Tunde like a wave, and he felt tears on his face again. Then it began to rain. Soft at first, just a few drops, then steadily, gently, soaking into the parched earth with a sound like a sigh of relief. People turned their faces to the sky, laughing and crying at once. Children danced. Old people fell to their knees in gratitude. The rain fell into the dry well, and as it did, something miraculous happened. The red stains began to wash away. Clean water began to bubble up from deep within the earth, mixing with the rain, rising higher and higher until the well overflowed with pure, sweet water. "The blessing!" someone shouted. "The gods have blessed us!" People ran to the fields and came back shouting that the withered crops were turning green again and that new shoots were pushing through the grey soil. Mothers reported that their sick children's fevers had broken. The dying livestock began to stand and eat. The land was healing because justice had finally been done. Tunde stood in the rain, feeling it wash away 20 years of dirt and shame and pain. He lifted his face to the sky and let the water pour over him, baptizing him into a new life. Chief Obuasi approached him, water streaming down his face. "The gods said you are chosen for something. What do you think they meant?" Tunde looked at the village, at people helping each other draw water, at old enemies embracing, at his Uncle Bayo teaching a young boy how to properly grip a hoe, at Amma smiling at him across the square. "I think they meant this," Tunde said. "They used my suffering to save all of you. They refined me in fire so I could reflect their light." The chief nodded slowly. "Will you stay with us? Will you help us become what we should have been?" Tunde considered this. Part of him wanted to leave, to walk away from the village that tortured him. But a deeper part, the part the gods had called pure-hearted, knew what he had to do. "I will stay," he said, "not because you deserve it, but because the gods chose me for this, to show you that strength is not found in a perfect body, that worth is not measured by wealth or beauty, that the weakest among you might be the strongest in the eyes of heaven." The rain continued to fall, gentle and persistent, washing away the village clean. In the months that followed, Adanko changed. They tore down the divisions between rich and poor sections. They shared the good soil. They cared for the weak and sick. They learned to see value in the different, the broken, the struggling. And Tunde became their teacher, not through words, but through his life. He still limped. His shoulder was still twisted. His face still bore the birthmark. But now, when people looked at him, they did not see a curse. They saw what the gods saw, a chosen one. The village prospered like never before. The harvest overflowed. The children grew strong. Peace settled over Adanko like a blessing. And every year, on the anniversary of the day they almost killed him, the village held a festival. They called it the Festival of Remembrance, a day to remember how close they had come to destroying their own salvation, and to celebrate the man who taught them mercy is stronger than judgment, that forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, and that the gods often choose the weakest things in the world to shame the wise. Tunde lived a long life, honored and loved. He married Amma, the girl who had apologized through his prison door. They had children who grew up in a village that taught kindness instead of cruelty. And when he finally died, old and fulfilled, the entire region mourned. They buried him with honors usually reserved for kings, and on his grave marker they carved these words: "Here lies Tunde, son of Adisa, called useless by men, called chosen by the gods. He endured cruelty without becoming cruel. He suffered injustice without becoming unjust. He was broken but never destroyed. His life taught us that the weakest among us might be the strongest in heaven's eyes."